Welcome. First of all, no help one. If it is a fire, you have to jump out the window, don't you? Okay, fine.
Or use the stairs preferably.
Use the stairs preferably, okay? Right, okay. Now let's start. We've got quite a hefty agenda here because we've got some things off from the last meeting. And the content, I've also got a number of items from a number of councils who want to speak. So tonight, so that everybody's aware, anybody who has to speak who's not a member of the committee, I'll be limited on for 4 minutes time here. That's quite clear from the start, okay? Right, number 1, minutes. To confirm the minutes, our meeting held on the 20th of January, which was laid on the table 30 minutes before the meeting. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. Apologies for absence. Amy, any apologies for absence?
Thank you, Chairman. Apologies from Councillor Seaborn, and Councillor Tony Gordon-Smith is attending as a substitute.
Welcome. Right. Okay. Well, declaration of interest. Amy, are there any declarations of interest that have been received before the meeting and where the members now have any interest?
None before the meeting, Chairman.
Okay, very good. Questions from members of the public? Any questions received from members of the public?
None received, Chairman.
Okay, very good. And members, any questions from members?
Also none received, Chairman.
Okay, alright, here we go. 2006. Service plan 2019-2022, which are in this section. And in fact, there are two members, two councillors who are not members of the committee to speak on this item. But first of all, Louise, can you introduce this item, please?
Thank you, Chairman. So it's this time of year again where you get the service plans from all the heads of service. And this year the service plans are a 3-year plan, 19 to 22. This is with a view to bringing it in line with the medium-term financial plan and gives us a chance to clearly sort of indicate where projects go over more than 1 year, so that it's a much more sort of useful plan. And can I remind members that these are essentially management tools, so in order to ensure the delivery of the corporate objectives. So you have got quite a lot of information in front of you tonight, but they are sort of a management tool for heads of service. And I'm not going to say anything more because my colleagues down the middle of the table are going to, and Peter will present their own sort of areas of services.
Peter.
Do you want to start, Peter?
Peter, yeah, go on then.
Or David?
David.
Oh, start with me.
Oh, well, that's
Right. Right, thank you. Yeah. So, as Louisa has just said, the kind of format's slightly different this year. We've got lots of business as usual actions in there, which is why that you'll see that for my service area, there's I think there must be 50 or 60 individual items in there. So it covers kind of the big strategic items and the more routine day-to-day actions that haven't always been included in previous years' service plans. I think I would draw members' attention to 4 of the kind of critical actions, if you like, which are making, we anticipate making a significant contribution to the kind of financial savings and the efficiency targets that are on us. So it's the kind of customer services review, which is now well underway, and we've got all staff participating in that process at the moment by providing us with some information that we didn't previously have. The ongoing review about our office accommodation requirements, including this site, which has appeared in previous service plans, is continuing, and we've made some progress over the last year in that. There's also the kind of management of the commercial portfolio, property company and property acquisition, which is a significant area. And finally, the last item I brought to attention is the fact that we are well underway with the introduction of the new IT system for building control and planning, and that's due to go live very shortly.
Could you just give me the numbers of those? It just helps so I can flick through as you do them.
Well, I didn't write those down. I probably could, but it'll take me a while to get there.
Oh, well, no, don't worry.
Yeah, sorry, there's about 60 or 70 actions, isn't there?
Yeah.
And they come under different outcomes.
It's page 15 to page
24.
24.
Yeah, 9 pages of it, I'm afraid.
Yeah.
Ah, okay.
So the customer service review, for instance, that's outcome 19. Outcome 15 refers to the office accommodation review.
That's page 22.
The commercial portfolio is in outcome 13. And the IT one is a bit earlier than that. Outcome 7.
Page 18.
Thank you.
I think it's important to realise, I think it's important to realise, you know, it's just an overview here, we're not going into depth and things, the items, but we'll be here after Christmas. I'm going to do that, but then, okay, right, anything else? Yes, which one first?
I think Councillor Band.
Councillor Band.
Right, thank you. Well, it's interesting to see, Chairman, that it's supposedly aligned with the medium-term financial plan, which makes me wonder why this column, reference to any additional resources needed, is it really appropriate, looking at the projected deficits in the medium-term financial plan, that the work should be done within existing budgets? Shouldn't there be some sort of target for at least contributing to overcoming the projected deficit? So it seems to me that just within the existing budgets is where you are at the moment. But overall, within a 3-year plan, perhaps we ought to be, I feel, ought to be more ambitious than that.
Yes, fair enough. Any comment on that?
Only to say that when we were completing this, what we were thinking of is the cost of doing these actions this year would be met within existing budgets generally. In other words, there isn't any additional spend required to do those actions this year, other than when that's actually referenced in the column, rather than looking at how much money would be saved as a result of that.
Okay, so you're saying it's not really a 3-year plan, it's a plan for work in the next 12 months?
Well, it's a little bit of both, because budgets are only set
Right.
every year.
Absolutely.
Okay. Well,
Chairman,
I still feel that you know that some attention needs to be made to the overcoming the forecast potential deficit in the medium-term financial plan.
Mr. Clark?
Well, Chairman, only to say that there is a savings target identified in the project initiation document, and I think it would be sensible to recognise it in the service plan actually, so I think we can do that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Councillor Adams?
Yeah, mine is really in a way associated with that, because for instance in the third item here, that's CCS 1.3 on page 16, it just says maintain dialogue with foresight group members and team leaders throughout the customer services review project, etc. for 3, well, and it just says from 19 to 22. Well, wouldn't it be a good idea if we actually had on here what the foresight projects were, and you know when they're due to have some results, and that I've just picked that one out, but this occurs in several different ones which are project related, in that there's nothing here which actually gives any indication of what the target dates and things for deliveries on the projects are. So where you've got a column at the end which you know tells you what the point of the exercise is, surely it should actually give you some indication of when the outcome of that project is going to be delivered. Well, we have further on.
Sure, the end date is that.
Well, no, the end date is 3 years, and it doesn't
Well,
tell
some
you
are
when
two,
the
aren't they? Some are two, some are two.
Oh yeah, yes, some are 2 and some are 1.
Some are
If
two.
you go to CC 5.1, there that's due in June. But I mean, what I'm saying is that obviously the foresight group consists of a whole series of projects, none of which are itemised, and no indication of when anything's going to be delivered.
Mm.
So this particular foresight group is just the customer services. Yeah. And of course, we anticipate that the customer services project and the rollout will continue over the period of this time, but it's quite a minor business as usual item in effect. It's just recognising the fact we'll continue to engage with a particular group of staff that are contributing to that project.
Well, okay.
Customer services, it's the customer services project.
So, but surely that project has some fairly key milestones in it, which they should be delivered on certain dates.
Yeah,
So
the-
what's the point in having a service plan if you don't actually match it up to deliveries?
Well, that's true. There is a kind of larger overall project, which happens right at the end. It is subsumed within the customer services project that appears in, I think it's outcome, where is it, outcome 19.
Chairman, I think this document is trying to do several things at once. It's to give, as Louis said, a management tool, so every head of service knows what he or she is signing up to.
Yeah.
Secondly, it's giving us information as to what we can reasonably expect of each service area. So if things happen later on, we can refer back to this. And it's a very summary method of saying how long each of the sub-projects will last. But you can cram only so much information onto one sheet of A4. And I think, and certainly there are much more detailed project plans which apply to some of these. With the CSP, in fact, it's still at the PID stage. We're waiting to see exactly what the initial survey data has produced. I think it's in May, isn't it? But so this is a bit of a summary, albeit it's a very detailed summary. But some things you just can't put, you just haven't got the space to put the detail in.
From what I can tell, it's always a very difficult item to judge it, how much detail you go into, isn't it, really?
Well, I mean, a lot of these items are really what you would genuinely call ongoing activities.
Yes.
And that to a certain extent is fair enough, although I think Mike's point about the decreasing budgets available should be taken into account. But then there are some which are specifically project related.
Yes.
Now, later on, obviously, further down, we get pictures of what's behind and what's not behind. But if we don't know what the dates are in the first place for the deliveries, then how can we actually anticipate whether they're going to be caught up or not?
Right. Well, there's some variation in the date. I think what he says there's some variation in the dates anyway in each action plan. So, fair enough. Okay. Any questions for Mr. Mark? Bob?
Yeah, page 24
Yeah.
is the amount, the investment required for the maintenance of bus centres, bus shelters, I beg your pardon, indicative of the saving we made or the cost we're going to accrue in view of the health and safety if we have to keep them up to par.
There's no real saving. This is just meeting our health and safety requirements to keep the bus shelters in good order. I mean, there might be a saving if bus shelter fell on somebody's head or something.
So we're not
an insurance claim, but really we're choosing at the moment to invest in the maintenance of bus shelters rather than get rid of them and just stick a hole in the ground.
No, it gave me the impression you weren't going to, and that's the way we were going to make a saving, you see. You clarified my thoughts, thank you. And we have 95. How many other bus shelters that aren't maintained?
We've got 95. There's about another 100 in the borough.
Because I've stood at a few without shelters. So.
Yeah, there's about 100 others that are maintained by parish and towns or county.
Thank you.
Okay. Yes, Inspector Holder.
I think it, 2.1 on page 16. Ensure the daytime and evening reception of it is of high quality. And then the impact of not completing action, disappointing contact with point of access can generate a negative reputation. I think if we have a negative outcome, we should change the system or review the system. But just saying that can generate a negative reputation doesn't actually do anything. I mean, it doesn't try it. It's not an answer.
So this is a kind of business as usual item, and it's there to sort of reflect our kind of aspiration to provide a good reception service that meets people's expectations. Obviously, if we fail to do that, then people will get a negative view of the councillors that come into the building. We do kind of test it by survey each year, and we do ask all members of their view about the evening reception service. So if you filled in your corporate services survey, you'll have the opportunity to comment on it. So normally the results are really good. Usually it gets a 90% rating. So we'll see what this year's survey says.
I still think they should be, if disappointed, review the system.
No, Chairman, sorry. The headline to that is the impact of not completing the action. Any action is a separate item. I entirely agree you would want to do something about it, but there should be normal managerial oversight, and if you get a bad survey response, one would expect something to be done about it. But all that's doing is simply stating what the impact is.
Couldn't that have annual review, for instance?
It was an annual, annual satisfaction survey of reception staff. And what we're saying is that's okay, but if it goes wrong, we've got to do, that'll be the impact.
That's right.
That's correct.
Yeah, the results over the last 2 years have been very good, and we'll see what they're like this year.
So it's not that we haven't got any, yeah, I mean, it's basically, it's reviewed annually.
The thing is, this is not a plan, it's an activity list.
Yes.
So it shouldn't be called a plan, it should be called activity list.
That's an interesting, yeah. Interesting suggestion.
Service activity list.
Yeah.
Yes, okay, that's very good suggestion. Right, okay.
Does bus stops come under street furniture?
It comes under the engineering team, who also look after the street furniture, yeah.
So, shouldn't the street furniture come in there apart from bus stops only? So that should be in the budget as well.
Indeed it is, it's just not.
Alright, so it's just been captioned as a bus
Yeah, we didn't list absolutely everything, but we chose to list the bus shelters, but yeah, they do street furniture as well.
Alright.
It costs about £10,000 to £12,000 a year to do the street furniture.
It does. More than that in the city.
Okay. Yes, again.
It just makes me wonder that this is so summarised
Yes.
that it's difficult to really get to grips with what
Yeah.
the detail behind it. And you really begin to wonder, what is it in this format an appropriate document to actually present to an ONS? I mean, it's very difficult to actually make a positive contribution to plans when they're summarised to this extent.
Chairman, one reflection on that is that we tend to have very different opinions from members about the level of detail that's wanted and will be helpful in these plans, which is fair enough. People have different views about things. We've had these plans in the past being very detailed, and we've had them being very summary. I think it would be fair to say that this format, as it is a middle ground between the two, trying to set out what we do with a level of detail, but not, a huge amount of detail. I think, on behalf of the team who has to coordinate putting these together, I do accept that that format will not be to every member's liking. What we have tried to do is to come to a middle ground that will provide the best option all round.
I think actually that the impression I'm getting is that we're getting to the stage where we're satisfying nobody, actually, in some senses.
Maybe.
I think it's summarised, but it's getting a little bit confusing. If it was sent in earlier, then the reports us councillors wanted could have been asked for or on the computer if we requested. So it needs to understand it, you have to see some of the reports, because it's too much summarised that it's getting confusing for me. I don't know the rest of the councillors.
Yes. Chairman, I think we're perhaps losing sight of the purpose of this. Whether it needs to come to the committee or not is another matter. But really it's providing this particular committee with information about what the services which it has scrutiny responsibilities for actually do. Certainly until I began the Budget Strategy Working Group work, I knew very little indeed in any detail about what people actually got up to. And I find this document useful because it does tell me in enough detail what people do, but I certainly wasn't expecting to go through it line by line and sort of question it. I think, Councillor Adams' point, if there was room on this page for another column which said what you'd do if something wasn't done, that might be interesting. But I see this as simply a source of information for members of this committee and the other ONS committees who are interested in what the council actually does, because I'll bet you that most members who are not on open scrutiny probably only have a fairly general view as to what each service head actually is responsible for.
Yes.
Right, Councillor Adams, we'll move on, I think.
Most of the first box of the actions options boxes actually have space below. It might be worth having one line at the bottom of the for more information and just a list of the documents that are current, which you could ask for if you want to find out more about this particular item. Just one line at the bottom there, just list what documents. There must be a code for the documents, so just say document, more detailed documents, etc., and list them along the bottom of that action.
Totally agree
box.
with Councillor Adams.
Okay. Quite clearly I haven't got it right yet. No, okay,
And
but
at least then we know,
yes, okay,
we can go to Robin and ask for them.
right. I think my Vice Chairman says, Councillor Molyneux, you seem to fall between many stools on this one, and
Well, the format changes every year, we just
Yeah,
vote
I
on
know,
boxes.
okay.
Looks like it's going to change again, David.
Okay, right. I think let's move on now. Economic development? Yeah, Louise, you're going to start.
Thank you, Chairman. Many apologies, Kelvin can't be here tonight, so he did send me some words, which really is a summary of his the economic development part of his community service action plan, service plan. So economic development falls under this committee, but the rest of his communities obviously falls under the community wellbeing ONS. So the focus of his economic development section of his service plan for this year sort of focuses on the action plan from the strategy, the economic development strategy. And what they're wanting to do is maintain and improve upon the strong relationships built with the 4 chambers of commerce, create more effective links with key bodies such as the LEP, the EM3 LEP, and Business South, to ensure that our businesses and infrastructure requirements are recognised. They want to help raise the profile of Waverley's visitor economy and help increase the business skills of our workforce and support business and employment growth both in our urban areas and in the rural areas. I'm sorry he's not here tonight. If there are any questions which none of us can answer, and I know the portfolio holder here is here tonight, he might be able to answer some of
I'll
those
do my
questions.
best.
I will take them back and get the answers back to you.
Anyone want any comments on that? Go and read yes, Councillor Brown.
Again, interesting. I think my comments I made earlier on sort of cover my view right the way across this, but one point that seems to be lacking, and when we raised it when we talked about the economic development strategy, was the rural economic development strategy. And there's very little in here about it. It touches on the local visitor economy, but it makes no reference to working with, for example, the AONB, which is the major part of our countryside is covered by an area of outstanding natural beauty. A lot of the work that goes on and from the visitor economy is done together with the county council, with the AONB. And the point we made before when the economic development strategy was talked about, it's a matter of interest. There's quite a lot of things that they are up to. One, for example, they've commissioned a piece of work with the Surrey University to look at the value to the local communities of countryside. And it does seem to me that there are a whole series of bits of work which we should be engaging with.
Do you want me to answer that?
Well,
you're going to wait till the end?
I think I've got to wait till the end if you don't mind.
Okay,
But
yeah.
okay. Anybody else want to comment on this section? No. Okay. Peter, finance.
Thank you, Chairman. So, 3 areas of service that I look after. There's the housing benefit team. Last year it went through a significant service review using the systems thinking methodology. I'll spare you the details because I've talked about this quite a lot over the last year. Well, last 2 years actually, it's been embedded in this last year. It went live in April 18. So it's now a really high performing service where the bedrock of the service is that if you phone up tomorrow for your benefits, to claim benefit, housing benefits, so long as you can bring the paperwork in that's off the back of the phone call that you have, you'll get dealt with on the day you turn up, and that's the ethos of the service. It's been working really effectively, so the service plan just for this next year is to continue that high level of service. The next area of service is the revenues team, which looks after the council tax and the business rates collection. That service is going through exactly the same review that the benefit team went through. That's all coming literally to a concluding stage of the project. So we'll be rolling out the new service during April through June, and then bedding that the performance element of the service in thereafter. The intention is to join the revenues team and the benefits team together as one team under one manager, making some cost savings, driving up some efficiencies in the process, creating a single controls team around the Silica system, which we use across both teams, so that we have a much stronger technical support within the team itself. So that's the oversight of what's going on in those two areas. The third area is the finance team. So a couple of key pieces of work underway in the finance team at the moment. Last year we implemented a new part of the Aggresso system, which is all about managing finances. So that really brought a strong governance culture into the organisation around the way we spend money and how we spend money. The front end of that, now that is working effectively for us, is to deliver to the service desks, to the managers' desks, a good suite of financial information so that they can have fingertip control of just where they're at in their spending and their financial performance. So that's all about supporting the medium-term financial plan and making sure that people understand where they're at in terms of managing service. A other really big initiative underway at the moment is to modernise and just bring up to date our financial infrastructure. By that I mean Aggresso, which is the management system that we use, financial management ledgers, the Adelante system, the BAC system. They're all being upgraded over the next 9 months. We're bringing in the latest payment technologies wherever possible to make sure that our financial administration is slick, and again we're driving out some efficiencies through that process. And that's the key thrust of the three service areas, so open to discussion.
Any questions, Councillor? Councillor Holder.
Thank you very much. I hope I'm on the right page. But I'm concerned about the rollout of universal credit, because how far have we got in terms of the amount of people who should be on it and aren't on it yet, and when do you hope that they'll all be on it?
Okay, so universal credit for Waverley went live at the beginning of October last year, so that's for all new claimants, all new uncomplicated claimants. There is a definition of uncomplicated as far as universal credit is concerned. And that's generally around families with 3 or less children. There is no set timetable or there's no set targets for moving people across. The process is as somebody comes up to a major change in their claim or a new claim, they go on to universal credit. That's the way they transition from housing benefit to universal credit. The government has given a date for a complete transfer, which was 2024, but there has been a lot in the news over the last 6 months around lots of delays and discussions. It's quite a political issue at the moment nationally as to whether 2024 is a realistic target. We know how long universal credit's been on the go now. It must be there on maybe 10 years in the making. So, we'll take our views on that. To date, looking at the figures, there's 126 people transitioned from our own caseload. In terms of new claims coming in, we can't say because they don't come to us.
126 so far.
Of our own claimants of transition. We have
Out of how many altogether?
3,000 working age.
Right.
So it's a gradual process. And bearing in mind as well, this time of year, as we're coming up to financial year end, is when a lot of the rent reviews happen. There's a lot of pay reviews, so people get pay rises. That all affects benefit claims. And if they're significant enough, then you'll find that there's a bit of a lump of people will come through, and then it will tail off again into the summer in terms of people transitioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I believe Waverley are in fact in one of the very top councils for the collection. I'm looking at outcome 3, exceed 99%. I believe we're right at the top of that, aren't we?
So that's council tax and business rates. That's our target. Council tax, business rates. We're near the top. There are other Surrey authorities that are not far behind that. So it's a good benchmark to be at. This particular area is pretty good at collection. It's not necessarily fair to compare benchmark against maybe the Midlands or the northern counties. They have very different demographics in those areas, so collection rates do vary. But 99% in this area is still challenging to achieve, to get that, because there's a whole demographic here around collecting money, but it is high performing.
Good.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Parker, do you want to say anything?
Well, actually, only just to remind members that so the 99% is of that year's bill in that year that you collect. So we still go after the 1%, just might take a bit longer to get. So, ultimately the aim is that you never write anything off, but I mean that's not realistic because we end up you have estates to deal with, and people pass away, etc. And you have absconders, bankruptcies, etc. But the 1% we don't collect in the year, we do continue to pursue.
You do eventually get it.
And sometimes you can get a payment arrangement, somebody that's sort of quite small, but all the time they're paying £10 a week. We'll keep them on the books for as long as possible.
Well, I think you should be congratulated on that.
Can we move on? Mr. Taylor.
Thank you, Chairman. There's 6 functions within policy and governance: legal services, democratic, human resources, communications, corporate policy and elections. What I'll do is just pick out 2 or 3 points under each of those headings as an introduction. So outcomes 1 to 4 within the plan will be delivered by corporate policy, led by Louise Norrie. The team will make sure the council has the right tools in place to make informed decisions, get the right policies in place at the council to effectively manage projects, to evaluate the quality impacts and monitor corporate performance. Hopefully around this table you'll be pleased to see that the team will also continue to provide dedicated support to the council scrutiny committees. The team will also coordinate the council's approach to complaints, making sure that those are well handled and learned from. Outcome 5 within the plan relates to our communications and engagement team, led by Harry Robinson. The team will bring forward a new strategy for public communications and engagement in 2019. The reference to the strategy should be 2019 onwards, not 2018 onwards. That will come to Council for consideration and approval. So the actions that are listed under this objective, which reflect the emerging strategy in the team, the new manager, still may change within the year. The heart of the team's work will continue to be that of keeping residents informed using both digital and non-digital channels. There's obviously a balancing act there. We need to improve our digital offer and make sure we keep up with the pace of changing customer expectations, but we aim to continue to connect effectively with those who do not choose to go digital. You'll see in the plan a greater emphasis than in previous years on engaging with and listening to members of the community, using surveys, consultations and discussion, participatory budgeting being just one part of that. Outcomes 6 to 8 refer to our democratic function, led by Fiona Cameron, and also the statutory monitoring officer function. So the plan sets out a commitment to supporting the council's democratic decision-making processes with committee administration and also good use of technology. We'll continue to promote and support high levels of governance and ethical conduct, ensuring training is provided on that, and also dealing with any complaints that come forward. The plan also reflects the Council's recent commitment to provide an excellent standard of council learning and development. There's obviously a particular focus in the next year to provide an induction programme for new and returning councillors in May, but we've also set ourselves the target of achieving a charter mark status in councillor development, so a general improvement in that area. Outcomes 9 to 11 relate to our elections function, set out the Council's commitment to conducting fair and transparent elections, polls, ballots, as well as the annual canvass. We'll continue to maintain the electoral register and also undertake any community governance reviews that arise. The next section of the plan, where there is a slight error on the numbering, I see that there's a few sort of hidden numbers in there, relates to our human resources team led by Katie Meekin. The 4 outcomes listed within this plan relate directly to the 4 outcomes within the Council's newly agreed HR strategy, so it's a direct map between those. So the first of those is about the Council's HR function being built on solid foundation. It's an important area of work. It involves reviewing and, where necessary, reshaping the Council's processes, procedures and workflows to make sure they're the right ones. The second objective is around how the Council recruits, develops and retains its employees with the right skills to carry out our work. The third objective there under HR relates to how staff are rewarded and paid. We need to make sure that our framework is appropriate and fit for purpose with a strong focus on performance. And the final HR objective is a commitment to ensuring that staff and councillors can access a high quality learning and development programme, so there's some crossover there with the charter mark. The final set of objectives relates to our legal services team led by Daniel Bainbridge. At the core of this section of the service plan is a commitment to providing high quality and timely advice to support the Council's delivery of services and strategic projects. And the plan also commits us to maintaining a high level of performance in land charges turnaround time, as well as providing an effective data governance service, making sure we comply with the 2018 Data Protection Act and responding to FOI requests. The final part of the plan there contains some cross-cutting projects. First of those is a new employee engagement strategy led jointly by HR and Comms. The second is supporting the delivery of the Waverley Customer Services Review project. That's an initiative that's being led by David within his service, but there's particular support elements from within my service that we will make sure that we do. And finally, the plan commits all teams within my service to plan for emergencies and any other incidents that can impact upon business continuity, so that if those events occur, the disruption to internal and external customers should be as limited as we can make it. Thank you.
Any questions, Mr.
So can I just ask, the gap 13 to 16,
Yeah.
is that just an accident?
It's just a typo. Yeah.
There are some hidden functions of which...
No, I know. I'm afraid I can't tell you what they refer to.
Okay, well, anybody else want to comment? Right. I have 2 councillors who have speakers here. Councillor Hyman. I'm afraid we've got to... Oh, where is it?
Oh, okay, sorry, right, thank you, Chairman. Yes, I think this is all my fault, and perhaps my band as well, and the council band and a few others who were saying that we should have more measurable targets, more defined targets in the corporate strategy, and that's where this has come from. We asked to look at the next level of detail because there wasn't really much detail in the corporate strategy, as befits a corporate strategy, it wouldn't have that. And we wanted to see more measurable targets, and I think I take on board David's point that a lot of this is business as usual stuff, where it's very difficult to set a target and therefore measure success or failure, because to do that you've got to pay for expensive independent surveys of everything that you do, and we simply haven't got the time or the money or the inclination to do that. So to some extent it is difficult to set those definite targets, but page 37 I recall, which is where Robin started. Number 4 on there is we must have a clear vision there, and I think that's somewhere where perhaps this committee might consider mentioning to the executive that this being an evolving process, that it would be helpful to officers if there were some more specific targets for them to be aiming at, so that they're not sort of working in the dark as to exactly where they're really headed. And I think that ties in with what Councillor Holden and Councillor Adams and Councillor Mona were saying earlier on in this item. Just a concern about the community meals, which is at CCS 11.2 on page 20, if I can drag you back in time a little. It's a bit difficult to see the page numbers, but the camera will come out. 11.2 says effectively market the services, community meals, effectively market the service to further increase take-up and enhance service viability. And if we fail to do that, then the service becomes unviable and has to cease. So that's quite an important one to a number of people. I've brought it forward as an example, really, because you have to then ask the question, are we already effectively marketing? Do we say we're already effectively marketing the service, in which case what's going to change? How are we going to do it more effectively or differently in order to save it from becoming unviable? So there are a number of things that this layout, these are the questions which I would want to take further, but we can't go into that sort of detail, as the Chairman has said, at this meeting on all these items. The next stage of, the next level of below this service plan, I assume there are more detailed targets and actions being taken on those, and I don't know whether your members want to see those. It's something I think I might bring up at our meeting on environment next week, but this is, for you, you might want to ask for a little bit more detail, or perhaps have a subgroup of 2 or 3 councillors who would want to look in further detail to advise the rest. So that's pretty much all I was really saying. I think we do need a more distinct vision, I think, from the executive in order to help, because the officers are between a rock and a hard place. We put them in a position where they, it's very difficult for them to set these targets so that we can judge whether we're succeeding or failing. Robin said, Mr. Taylor has said, we've got the charter mark being that's the sort of thing we're looking for, really, where we can say, yes, we've done it, happy. Something for the staff to be proud of, and us to cheer them for. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I mean, the other point I said to that is that, we're looking at specific words, like your meal service has to cease. I mean, it would probably better say it may have to be reviewed or something, I don't know. But anyway, there we are. Right, Councillor X.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Just to come back to Councillor Band, I fully agree with what he says. It's the second time he's mentioned this to me, actually. The first time I did go back to officers and they haven't put it in the service plan. And I agree entirely, and I apologise to Councillor Band for not having it in there. And we will have it in there in the future, because I will insist, okay? And I will try and come back to the committee with the proposals on the service plan.
Thank you very much. Right. Thanks. Okay. Well, we have a recommendation here. Yes, cut all of it.
PG 18.1.
Yeah.
Gender pay gap. I hadn't realised we had a gender pay gap. I thought everybody was an equality in this council. I hadn't realised there was any discrimination. I think it's appalling. There shouldn't be a gender pay gap.
It's okay. I quite agree with you, Councillor Holder, but I think it's a very deep issue which
So every council is required now under new rules to report their gender pay gap. It's it's a calculation that every organisation, every public organisation has to report. So every organisation has a slightly different gender pay gap with a different gender pay gap profile. What we need to do as part of our broader work with human resources, whilst we're looking at how we recruit, attract the right staff, give them the right skills, give them the right reward package, we need to take account of what that gender pay gap tells us as part of the wider picture.
Okay. Right. Wow, another recommendation here. I think this is very interesting. It says recommended that the Borough for Money and Customer Service and Overview and Scrutiny consider the service plan for 2019-22 as in Annex 1 and makes any observations to the management team and any policy recommendations to the executive. Clearly we haven't got quite right at the moment, have we? There's some specific recommendations. That's some general points. I want to word that.
I think we leave that to... Yes,
yeah, you leave that to him. Well, I think it's important that the specific recommendations, such as Council Band, should be noted, please. Yeah. And right. Anything else? Well, on that basis, can we have that recommendation? Yes, agree. No?
Yes.
Agree. Oh, wow. Okay. Right, let's move on. Corporate performance report on quarter 3. Louise, could you introduce yourself, please?
Thank you, Chairman. So quarter 3 performance report, October to December last year. A good quarter in many ways. The services under the remit of this committee are laid out on pages 61 to 70. So that covers customer and corporate services, finance, policy and governance. You will find, particularly this committee, I think, will be interested in the new Appendix A, which is on page 92, which gives you a lot more detail on the budget analysis which this committee asked for in the past, so you might be interested in that. As far as the services under this committee are concerned, I think there are a couple of highlights on page 64, which is the vast improvement in performance on the payment of invoices, both within 30 days and to small and local businesses, which has gone back into, certainly the small businesses has gone back into green for a number of quarters in red, so that's really good news, and I know the staff there have worked really hard to do that in the sort of Peters area. Unfortunately, under the complaints area, we have struggled to meet the challenging target for level 1 complaints, which has always been high at 95% for level 1 complaints. These need to be done in 10 days. And we've always struggled to meet that target, and again in this third quarter we're slightly lower. Number of complaints coming in at level 1, and they have to be dealt with alongside business as usual in some very busy business areas such as planning, so we've struggled with that. And level 2, which we've normally met that target of 95%, this third quarter we've again, a couple of really sort of complex level 2 have just taken us under that performance level. So, but we're working hard, we know the reasons, and they'll be back on track next quarter, I'm sure. Okay, that's it from me.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I thank Peter, as I imagine he was the person responsible for drawing together page 92. And rather than waste the committee's time, I've got one or two further suggestions to make, and I'll take them up with him offline. Fundamentally, I'd like to see general fund and HRA completely separated, because it's the way that we think about things here. One question, just out of interest, in the finance section on page 66, there are two quite large variances. The positive one, 371,000 additional income, is fully explained in the text, but the 194 of additional expenditure, I can't see anything. Could you clarify what that's about?
Certainly. It's a combination of a reduction in the amount of money we're getting back through summonses. It's about 50 grand's worth of that, and there's an adjustment to debt provisions for this year, which reflects the impact of universal credit on recovery of housing benefit overpayment.
Do I remember you telling me also there was some concerns, may not be under this heading, with when we deal with homelessness, we put people into private rented accommodation, we provide the deposit, which is normally for 6 months.
We do, yes.
And is any part of the difficulty in recovering that from the tenants included here, or does it go somewhere else?
It's elsewhere. It belongs to the service.
Okay.
The home is the service.
Right. So in terms of the future, I mean, the summons, is that in fact good news in the sense that fewer people are being summoned?
Yes, so it's good news. We're not getting, within our recovery process, it's working more effectively to secure the payment earlier.
Okay. And the debt provision that you mentioned, is that liable to be a continuing feature?
It features in the budget we've just approved, 150,000 additional budget, reflecting going in base budget to reflect the fact that there is an impact from universal credit going forward on our ability to recover overpayment. Overpayment is something that we can't necessarily control as an authority. It depends on the claimant's activities telling us.
By overpayment, you mean where we have mistakenly paid them more benefit than they were entitled to?
Well, it's not mistaken on our behalf. It's about 8 years ago, the government changed its policy from claimants having to apply every year for housing benefit to the government taking the stance that the claimants were honest and they would tell us when there were changes in their circumstances. We get downloads every day now from the government's National Fraud Centre, which is a collation of information from numerous sources such as payroll, tax, the banks paying interest, and they pick up every day where claimants, we give them a download every month of what's on our benefit system.
Yeah.
And the National Fraud Centre do a data match, and then they give us files every day of where there's a mismatch in the information we hold and what they know about claimants' income. And that generates changes in claimant circumstances and generates overpayment, which we then go to recover. We get, for overpayments that are identified, we get 40% of that money back from the subsidy from the government rather than the whole amount. And the incentive then is on us to recover the money,
right.
And we get to keep that money. However, the recovery is actually quite difficult.
Sure. Thank you.
Mr. Councillor Holder.
I think, looking at the same page, rent costs, I can't understand why if 1718 was 687,000 and this year it is forecast at 662,000, why the budget was reduced to 428? It seems rather odd. Why didn't we just follow through from one year to the other?
Page 92.
I couldn't answer off the top of my head on that one. I'd have to get back to him.
Okay, well, we'll get back to you, Councillor Holder.
We put a note round to members afterwards, Chairman.
Please. Span.
Thank you. Well, I like the new format. I like the service dashboard commentary on each particular section, and I like the idea that there's a financial commentary on each section as well with the variances. My only comment, which is a personal issue really, is at the end of, seeing we're looking at the end of the third quarter, I would have liked to have seen in the financial columns the income and expenditure to the third quarter, because it would have given me a much better position to judge whether those variances reported are realistic. Now we've got the section 151 officer's assurance that they are, and I guess we have to be content. But on a personal basis, I would have liked to see the figures at the end of the quarter, and then made a judgment as to whether I could comment on the variances and whether I thought they were realistic or not. But otherwise, I actually think it's a major improvement, I think, the way it is done. And I particularly like the dashboard and the individual variance commentary in each section.
Thank you very much. I'm sure I'll take it on board, yes. You'll take that on board?
Yeah,
okay,
absolutely, yes.
Yeah. Just one point that Louise mentioned about compliance, actually, and you were saying actually that, you know, and I think I asked a question, 10 working days is very ambitious, isn't it, for a compliance procedure? And how does that relate to the local authorities around? You don't know, do we?
Jill, I'm sorry, I don't know, because everybody has slightly sort of different, there's no statutory, there's no sort of legislation over this area, so everybody does it slightly differently. But what I will do is investigate and come back to you on that and see how we compare.
If you don't mind, I think that'd be helpful to us all.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay. Anybody else have any item on this particular correspondence? Okay. The recommendation, it is recommended that the Overgreen School Committee considers the performance of the service areas under the remit of the committee as set in Acts 1 to this report and makes any recommendations to senior management or the executive as appropriate. Is that the detailed comments okay with everybody? Yes, agreed? Agreed. Oh, thank you very much. Right, onwards we go. Item 8, progress against medium-term financial plan. Mr. Vickers. Verbal report, it's just a verbal report on the medium-term financial plan.
Sorry, Chairman, I was just conferring with Yasmin on what we've agreed on this one.
I see. Okay.
Which it was.
Do we have a medium-term
plan? No. Well,
Sorry, Chairman, I'll just give a brief update.
Just a brief update, please.
I just had to catch up with Yasmin on maybe where we're at with this one. So, we've got the service plans on the table. as Councillor Band points out, they don't necessarily reflect all the activity that goes on the savings targets or the medium-term plan. Heads of service have just literally, we've announced last week that heads of service have reorganised or regrouped the services that they are going to be looking after going forward. So I'll be taking on property, for instance, and Kelvin will take over as take on building control and under the title of commercial services. From there, targets will be given to the individual heads of service to start to work forward and work up their plans to address the bigger issue within the medium-term strategy. A key piece of work, and David's mentioned this within his service plan, which is the corporate process at the moment of looking at how we deliver customer service across all of our services within the council, which is something that all services will pull together to deliver on. So that's a project which it's in its initiation stage at the moment. So the whole feasibility study is being currently studied, and the answers will be coming out of that in terms of exactly how it will go forward towards the end of May, where we'll have, looking at Louise here for some some support, some project plans on the table as to just what we're going to be doing and how over the timescales.
Okay, thank you very much. Anybody wish to comment on that? Councillor Adams, yes.
Well, not specifically on the plan itself, but the movement of building control from planning to Kevin's department, are they physically going to move, or are they going to stay where they are with planning and enforcement? Because there's very close links between building control, new business, and what's going on in planning, and very close links between what building control do and what enforcement have to pick up. So I would, even if Kevin's managing it, it should really stay physically where it is.
Chairman, no reason why building control team will move physically. It's a change of line management. That strong connection between planning and building control will exist still. What the thinking was that a fresh sort of leadership will help strengthen the income, but it's certainly not at the expense of the connection with planning, and that actually has been sort of even more reinforced with new building control guidance that's come out recently as well. So yes, it's a really good point, Chairman, and we're very aware that this doesn't mean disconnecting the two teams, quite the opposite, but we're hoping that link up with the commercial drive will strengthen the income and the marketing of the service as well, but without losing that planning sort of roots, if you like.
Okay.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Anybody else want to comment on this? Okay, well, no recommendation. We'll just move on. Agenda item 9, budget strategy working group update. Councillor Mulliner.
Thank you, Chairman. Not much to add at this stage. We're kind of got a meeting with the executive and strategic directors just to make sure everyone is pointing in the same direction as we begin to address the medium-term financial strategy issues. That document is deliberately designed to show, if you like, examples of where savings and income might possibly come from, but no one pretends at this stage that we have any certainty about any of it. And just to give you one very current example, if you looked at it, you will see that we expect, or the plan envisages increasing our property income by 300,000 a year every year for 3 years. So in 3 years' time, we've been earning 900,000 a year more than we are at the moment. Now, leaving aside Brightwells and how soon that comes on the screen, I think we all accept that the property market is something which you cannot predict. We might find something absolutely perfect next week, but then again we might not in the next two years. So it's those sort of very significant uncertainties which we're going to have to grapple with. And there's no sense in pretending that we've got clear answers today. But over the course of the summer really, because by October and November at the latest, the budget for next year has to be in pretty good order, and that will have to address what I think the officers expect is a shortfall in income compared to this year of around about 750,000 a year. So we know what the scale of the project is, the challenge, and we have to get stuck into doing something about it.
Yes, Councillor.
The problem is it's a bit like Brexit. Every year we have the same issue, and even when Mike was doing it, he used to make the same predictions. He'd say, well, we're fine this year, but look at the difficulties we're going to have next year. And so we always know that, or so far every year, finance have managed to pull something out of the bag and move forward, managed to close the gap. So we have every confidence that finance will be able to find a way.
Well, there is a difference this year. There's been a very well flagged dynamic duo of the fair funding review and business rates retention. And most of the southern districts and boroughs do not expect to emerge from that any richer at all. Indeed, they expect to lose at least part of their current, for us, 2 million a year retained business rates. Now, how much of that? I mean, we're assuming cautiously the whole lot will go over, say, a 3-year period, but we do not know. Nonetheless, as the Chairman said in an earlier meeting, it would be foolish not to take a cautious view on it.
Oh yes, I quite agree.
And that's exactly what we're doing.
Yeah, I think it is very different. I mean, obviously previous years, but I think it's very different from previous years because, quite frankly, there's lots of other factors going on as well. Dare I mention Brexit? All right. And you know, and so we don't know where we're going. In 6 months' time, it could change quite rapidly. So I do think we're in a slightly different, you know, we might have to dig a bit deeper into the hat for the White Rabbit next year. I don't know. Yes, can hold it.
Yes, there's a comment I made before, but I think in this property market we are minnows compared to some of the bigger councils, such as Belthorpe, who are able to borrow from the Public Works Loan Board at a much cheaper rate than we can. So as a result, any good commercial property that comes up for sale, Spelthorpe invariably outbid us. So we're competing for not such profitable companies, which in the end we don't buy because it's not profitable enough. So, you know, it's a kind of chicken and egg situation. I'm not sure.
I think I'd rather be in our position, Council, than Spelthorpe at the moment, because they've bought quite a lot of money actually, and they bought big investments, and now they're ruining it. You know, they're ruining it there. But I mean, I take your point, but I think the cautious approach that's been adopted is the best way forward.
Councillor Band probably can comment. I didn't think that our borrowing rates were any different to any other councils.
Yeah, Spilthorpe has 1% or something, and they have a much cheaper rate because they're able to borrow much more money.
Yes, and
they have a property portfolio of nearly £1 billion.
Yeah, well, no, that is not necessarily a source of total joy.
No.
I mean,
how did you find out?
Sick. We're going to be another Northampton, but somewhat closer to us.
Okay,
So, Chairman, we're all able to access the same borrowing market through PW and the same borrowing rates. I think when Spelthorpe made their largest acquisition, which was the Sunbury office complex, they financed that. Not, I think they did some of that through PWRB, but you know, even the scale doesn't give them preferential rates. Actually, they did finance over a very long period of time, that one. But yeah, they've since added significantly to their portfolio, and £1 billion is what they've borrowed, and they're right out there for even some of the bigger councils, to be honest. But certainly in the district and borough councils, they're top of the league in the country. So East Hants are borrowing heavily at the moment to the south of us to acquire commercial property. So we have a strategy that this committee played a very important part in preparing and getting through the council, and that's what we're operating under, and I feel comfortable doing that. I think it's proportionate. That's not to say that we would never look at an opportunity that's beyond the strategy if it was really, really good for us, and we'd bring that back. It would just have to go to council rather than straight through this committee on the way to the executive, because it probably would be above the limit that was agreed for delegation.
I think it was only in the Surrey Advertiser recently, we said there were only 3 Surrey authorities who hadn't borrowed any money for this purpose. I'm almost Waverley, Guildford and Reigate and Banstead, I think, actually. So I think caution to the very best way forward. Do you want to come on, Councillor Barron?
Thank you, Chairman. I mean, in answer to sort of Councillor Adams, I mean, I do think the situation is different now. I mean, 7 years ago, we had the advantage of still being able to work through some fairly substantial cost savings internally. And we were having the advantage of some some very good investor saved projects which came online and made a major contribution as at the same time as interest rates were going down and the rate support grant were going down. So we had the benefit of those. Those have been worked through. They continue to provide benefit, but I think the tough thing is tougher now. So when you work your way through cost reductions as an organisation, there's only so much you can do with the organisation delivering the services as they currently have been. And I think that's one of the great achievements Waverley's had. It's been able to maintain its services, maintain its support externally. But the choices going to be in front of Waverley, I think, are going to be perhaps more challenging.
And probably outside the original control as well.
Yeah. So I think we have done well, but I think officers have made a major contribution to that. I have to say, I think they have worked very well in the past. I'm sure they will again, but I think the situation is different.
It is indeed. Anybody else wish to comment? No recommendation on that, I think. So we'll move on. Still governance arrangements, criteria and financial thresholds. Mr. Clark.
Thank you, Chairman. Chairman, this is the second time we brought this subject to this committee. The first time was in November. And members, we had a very thorough debate on the detail there, and the executive took on board a number of the comments that the committee made in putting its recommendations to the council in December. And in December, the council agreed a number of things, which I'll come on to in a minute. Just working through the report very quickly, Chairman. Just on the background, paragraph 1, paragraph 2, just to remind members that we've got an adopted SIL that starts on the 1st of March. What we're talking about here in this report is the governance arrangements, the process for allocating money to infrastructure projects over time. It's unlikely that SIL in cash terms will start coming in for a good few months. That's certainly been the experience of many other councils that have implemented SIL. But we need to get our governance arrangements in place, and subject to the committee this evening, we're hoping that that can now move forward to executive and council later in March, and then we can get underway then. So what the proposals are, Chairman, paragraph 5, full council in December agreed that we would set up a SIL advisory board comprising of 7 councillors, 3 portfolio holders, including 3 portfolio holders and 4 non-executive members. Council also agreed that the detailed criteria for spending SIL receipts would be prepared by the SIL advisory board, and also that we would have a threshold for the delegation to the executive of approved strategic fund spending. So that paragraph 6 says that meeting is now convened, and it was a very good meeting. You were there, Chairman, and participating, so thank you for that. Councillor Denis chaired that, and this report is a report back from that SIL advisory board for comments of this committee on its way to the executive and council. So I'm not going to sort of just read through everything that was agreed, because it's set out in the annex, annex 2. What members are also asked to look at is the terms of reference that the advisory board agreed, which is in annex 1. And just to remind members, what we're dealing with here is the strategic SIL, and paragraph 8 sets out the various sort of component parts of SIL. We're talking about the strategic SIL that Waverley Borough Council will retain and allocate. And so the criteria is set out in here, as is the terms of reference. And probably the best thing is to look at the recommendations from executive to council, the proposed or the draft recommendation on page 96 and 97, Chairman. And maybe this could be the focus of the committee's consideration, to look at the terms of reference, the proposed framework, and then the approval of some of the sort of the bottom slice for sort of lower value but desirable community infrastructure projects that was specifically aimed by the advisory board at town and parish areas in particular, where there's been a lot of development and their ability to generate additional SIL is more limited. So those 5 recommendations, Chairman, are at the moment in draft, ready for the executive, and welcome any comments from this committee this evening. Thank you.
Just one question. If a developer puts forward a plan today or tomorrow, bearing in mind the SIL kicks in on March the 1st, and that developer is relying on his 106 section agreement, and if we then turn that developer down, he comes back again, is he then subject to SIL, or can he then continue with his 106?
That's an interesting question.
Well, so I have to say, I haven't got the SIL expert here with me in terms of the operation of SIL. What I understand is that that they would pay SIL if it's determined, if the planning application is determined after the 1st of March, then they would pay SIL. I can certainly check that out with Marissa and get an answer on that.
It's a very valid question, actually, Councillor.
I think, if I can make a comment, when we had the debate, it was quite clear that there are situations where both WAS 106 and SIL would apply. Some things which would be covered by S106 and other things which would be covered by SIL.
Or could be, I think.
Could be.
Could be, I think, is a better argument. Yes. Yes, Councillor.
There's been quite a lot of misinformation on this area, and I do thank you for this very clear report here. A lot of councillors, including myself, weren't exactly sure what a CIL was. I did know what a 106 was, and these things tend to change. But can I urge you all to get a move on with this, because there are expectations that I know it's not a wonderful pot of gold, but people are hoping that there will be some expectations from it as soon as possible.
Yes, I think, Councillor, I mean, I totally agree with you personally, because, I mean, it's been set up as a golden goose, isn't it? There's lots of golden eggs.
Well, it's got, yes.
And it may not be the
it's not.
No, I mean very silly here, but I mean, 94 million, how that's combined in 13 years, compares to the European jackpot of about 154 million. It's the first one, and it's only puts about 3 board and back after the interest. And I've got other people who are there any other councillor on the committee who wish to speak? No. Well, I've got 2 councillors who are expressing interest to speak, and I shall take them. Councillor Hyman first.
Thank you, Chairman. Just something that's just been said about in respect of what we can and can't spend CIL on. And at the top of page 95, the second bullet point down there confused me slightly, because it tells us that the neighbourhood CIL may be spent by town or parish councils on a range of infrastructure projects as long as it meets the requirement to support the development of the area by funding the provision, improvement, replacement, operation or maintenance of infrastructure or anything else. Now, I'm absolutely certain that our CIL has been put together on the basis that, for instance, SANGS, which we use for habitats compliance, we use section 106 alongside CIL and will continue to do so, and other site-specific infrastructure will still go through section 106, with my understanding. But I had the understanding that we could only pay for capital purchase of land, and that we could not spend it on improvement, replacement, operation or maintenance, so that still had to go through the section 106 route. And yet it says here that those rules don't apply to parish councils, which is, I think, strange. So I'm not going to ask you necessarily to come back to me on that, because your expert is an empty chair. But if I could, please, if we could have confirmation if different rules apply and whether that's an advantage or a disadvantage to us. It could be. there are other issues which I will take up separately with, I think, rather than at this meeting. But in general, I think you've done a good job at looking at this. It's been going a long time. It starts in 10 days to a fortnight's time, doesn't it, collecting the money, which is good. So, yeah, it's a very imperfect and it's not an exact science. It's a broad brush, but it brings in, or should bring in, money that can definitely be used for infrastructure needs. So the bidding process, that's difficult because we're reliant on the bidders, aren't we? Whether it's a Care Commission or Surrey County Council or whatever, whether they put their bids in well, how much match funding there might be through LEPs particularly, and it's really difficult to put together a scoring matrix. I'm sure we could put together another half dozen scoring matrices and all of them would look just as good. We're just going to have to try suck and see and come back and look at it again, because it was adopted and it was passed by the inspector on the basis that we would be reviewing it soon, as, you know, when we've got a little bit of experience in its operation. So fully supportive of, obviously, that we do that, and what's being done, well done.
I would add actually, Ken, it is true, I believe, that there are different rules for parish and town councils which are less restrictive than borough councils.
I'm absolutely sure of that, and actually Marissa, who is our expert, drafted those paragraphs, so I'm having consulted with our legal team, so I'm confident in what it said there, but I'll just get a bit of further explanation from her and circulate that.
What it means for us in the, you know, the particular nuances of our collections.
I'd also done the scoring matrix, Councillor Hyman, that there was lots of debate at that town meeting, if I remember rightly, and in fact, you know, there was some, it was meant to be left as a more flexible arrangement for that to learn through time.
Sorry, Chairman, if I might just say, on one issue I did notice, which I saw that deliverability is scored, and in a way, in principle, I would have thought that deliverability is one of the initial criteria before you get into the scoring. If it's not deliverable, then, you know, or some elements of deliverability, but I can see why you've had to put it in, because of timings and the rest. The details, I'm pleased with what's
Councillor Band.
Well, I think it's a good report, and I'm pleased to see the sort of governance arrangements have been modelled substantially on the proposals for the Investment Advisory Board that was set up and flip, which takes me to the recommendations here. The only one I've got any difficulty with is actually recommendation 5, which appears to allow the advisory board to change anything within the governance arrangements. Now, I would be concerned that the financial limits ought to come back to council. I don't personally. I think that allowing them to do that and without getting council's approval on the financial limits, it would be, you know, a departure from what we've done elsewhere.
Yes.
So, in principle, I understand what you're trying to say. Here, but with that one exception, I think it ought to be included as a.
You have preempted what I was going to say. I think the word "make revisions" should be "propose revisions," and I would expect normal scrutiny procedure to follow.
Right. Okay. My main issue is with the financial.
No, I entirely agree with you. It's completely open. They can change anything at all.
Well,
they could cut the neighbourhood number to nothing and increase it to 50%. In theory.
Not exactly, because remember, all we do is recommend to the executive. So once we've, what we're doing here is actually making recommendations to the executive. It's up to the executive whether they put it up to council.
I agree, but nonetheless, when it comes to, a lot of sweat has gone into producing these governance arrangements, and absolutely the CIL board will be closest to it, will have the best reason to propose things. But I think the normal rule should apply, that they should say, look, this is what we think, and others should be able to
absolutely consistent with the Investment Advisory Board, making recommendations to the executive, but when it comes to financial limits, any change to those have got to come back to council for approval. And quite specifically, the executive is not being given the authority to do that on its own. So I think, you know, elsewhere here, where, you know, where the upper limits have already been reverted to council for approval, and I think with any of the other financial limits that has to be
Okay. One final comment. The only reason why we did that here is because in the first year we think things might be changing quite a lot. And rather than actually, I mean, you could put a limit on the amount, on the percentage change that we could make, but I mean, I think, you know, we didn't want to keep bringing things back to council if we felt that it wasn't working in the first 4 or 6 months. I mean, I don't know what Graham thinks about this, but because you were on the meeting, you were in the meeting as well.
Yeah, no, I mean...
That's why we put it in like this, but we could change that recommendation at the end of the year because it's going to be reviewed anyway.
So I think, as Councillor Band's saying, I mean, we've established pretty well with the investment advisory board after best part a couple of years actually, you know, a good sort of report back. And the advisory boards aren't decision making; they're advisory. They advise the executive. But yeah, you're absolutely right, Councillor Adams. We wanted to put something into the meeting tonight to get some discussion, and that was around avoiding lots of feedbacks if there were any tweaks to make, particularly in the first year. But there's absolutely no reason why the committee can't recommend that, you know, as mentioned just now, that this is subject to the usual sort of scrutiny and approval process. And we'll see. I mean, it will probably be 12 months' time before we are, you know, considering bids against money that we've received, I would imagine. And so I think that's
of any consequence anyway.
Yeah, yes, I think so.
I would also think, Councillor Bantle, point on number 4, which says that the recommendation subject to an upper limit of 2.5 million, above which approval reverts to the council. So that built something into it.
It did, but I mean,
I know.
if I read 5, they could change that with our own will to 5 million.
I don't think that was our intention, was it really?
I'm not sure it wasn't your intention, but I think let's get the words right.
It's okay, fair enough. Councillor Williams, I think you've asked to speak too.
If I may.
Yes, please.
Just a few points from the task and finish group. Most of these notes are taken from the main notes for our next meeting, which will in fact be on Wednesday. The group has had 5 meetings so far. Wednesday we will consider the draft report, which we will send to ONS. We could have another meeting early in March, but I think from how matters have been proceeding, the report will be ready after the meeting this coming Wednesday. The points, again, as I say, taken from the notes in the next meeting are all obvious, but it is worth making the points. The IDP, we all know that this is a living document and it needs to be brought up to date on a very regular basis. We'll be asking the heads of service to review and update the lists. And if there is any match funding opportunity, this information should also be recorded on the IDP table. And obviously we need to keep in touch with other lead agencies. Bids for SIL. Again, the list is a strong positive indication for bidding. Again, we must look at what funding can come from parishes, from their own SIL. And as said before, we need to look very closely at match funding. How to prioritise bids, that will be reviewed on Wednesday, so I can't make any further comment on that. It's very important that we all work very closely together, county, parishes and ourselves. There will be a number of common issues to discuss, and also cross-boundary matters will be important. At the moment we are considering whether it would be helpful if we suggested that there should be Surrey County Council representative on our own Waverley board. That may or may not be appropriate, but that will certainly be suggested. again on the board, again, as I say, some of these things are very obvious. They need to be regularly updated on current planning matters, the size of the development, the time when that development may start, may be completed. It's very important that the board has a overview of the position as we go forward. Also, perhaps, where the civil funding is not deemed to be critical or essential, it might assist the board to have some ongoing support. Annual reporting on civil funding to be supported from the ONS. That's it all in a nutshell. I would say that I would like to thank the officers concerned. A lot of work has been done in a very short period of time, and I hope that when the report comes out it will be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Right. Anybody else want to comment?
Well, I mean, just to settle this, I mean, see whether this is what the committee wants or not, but I mean, my proposal would be to change the word make to propose, and subject to their view of the scrutiny process and the part would suit the committee's needs, it would meet Councillor Band's point.
Everybody happy with that? Anybody want to say anything more? So, subject to Councillor Muller's amendments, are we all happy with that?
Agreed.
Agreed. Okay, agreed. Right, let's move on. Yes, thank you very much. Capital strategy, Mr. Vickers.
Thank you, Chairman. Just let the room settle down. Okay. So, Chairman, this is a new document for Waverley. It's a separate requirement that we have a capital strategy. It has to be in place by the 1st of April 19. So those are the background to this. It brings together the Prudential Code for capital finance and the Code of Practice on Treasury Management. So the committee will be familiar with the Treasury Management. We bring it every year. It's been a standalone document, quite a significant document in length and content, around managing our money market funds. The capital strategy brings together all of our capital investment across all services, including our external property investment board under one umbrella. So this is an overarching document. The best way to view the document really is to look at the infographic, which is Annex 1. I'll hold it up so you can get an idea what I'm looking at. This is the easiest way to really understand what this document's doing. So the capital strategy works over two bits. There's a treasury strategy, and then there's the non-treasury, which is the asset management. So there's banking and money market, and then asset management. The key thrust of the capital strategy really is about enhancing our governance around the whole of the capital work that we do. So it brings a lot of the work into play that the capital working group did last year, which Councillor Bandler was essentially leading on. And a lot of the recommendations came out of that. You can see that reflecting on the right-hand side, on your right-hand side of the document. You can see it. So capital projects and say paid business case, management project. A lot of those recommendations actually have flown through into the capital strategy. So each element of our activities are quite unique, and you can see that in the infographic. There's the property investment strategy, there's housing revenue account, asset management, there's the operational property, which is this building and many other buildings that we have operationally across the borough. Then there's capital projects, which is part of the budget that we bring forward, looking after the not just the asset base, but the individual capital projects that we're trying to bring on stream. There's a commercial, sorry, and below those things is the individual uniqueness comes out in how we manage each of those aspects, and that's captured in those little balloon speech bubbles that you see on the page. So, for instance, the commercial investment, it just summarises how we go about governance dealing with commercial investments. Existing assets, it talks about how we manage leases. The housing and the operational assets, it talks about the management of that, the running costs, and how we look at fit condition of those assets. And then the capital projects, it very much plays into the working group's output last year in terms of PIGs and the business case. So in a nutshell, that kind of is what it's all about.
In a nutshell.
In a nutshell.
In a nutshell. Thank you very much.
Without getting technical about it.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much. Yes. Councillor Molyneux.
Thank you, Chairman. Peter, just on that infographic, just clarify a couple of things for me.
Certainly.
In the left hand of the right hand set, the non-treasury management, you've got both commercial investment and existing assets, percentage of income. What is that getting at exactly?
Commercial risk asset. I'm not entirely sure, to be honest. I have to go and have a look at the detail.
Okay, well, whether it's meant to be a reference to a yield or whether it's the proportion that it contributes to the whole.
That would be yield in terms of assessment, but I'll go back.
Maybe percentage yield would be clearer.
Yeah, it's
the other thing,
not
just
well spelled out.
And under running costs, which covers both operational profit and housing revenue, you've got a wonderful phrase: prioritisation linked to strategy. Does that mean whether we're keeping it or not?
Yes.
Okay. Perhaps long-term holding strategy might be clearer.
Okay.
Something like that.
Okay. Yes, Councillor Holder.
Well, it's many years since I was an investment banker, but at the time we did a lot of business with commercial enterprises who issued their own certificates of deposit. I'm wondering if we've ever considered issuing a Waverley certificate of deposit, because that would be a cheaper way of funding than perhaps going to the money market.
Technical question.
So, Chairman, we don't fund our capital programme through the money market. We don't have any borrowing effectively at the moment other than the housing mortgage that we took out a few years ago. If we were to borrow, we would go through PWLB, the Public Work Loan Board, which we were talking about earlier around the spell form. We're highly unlikely to go anywhere else at this point because we wouldn't get the same rates as we'd get through PWLB. We do some internal borrowing through our cash flow because we have money market funds that ebb and flow across the year of between 70 and probably tops out at the moment about 85 million in cash at any one moment in time. There is an element of self-funding that happens within that, but it's not significant and it's not long term. It's just making efficient use of our cash flows. But we only ever do that if we feel that we can get a better rate of return on an internal borrowing than actually putting the money on the market, in the money markets. Does that help, Councillor?
Yes, I would add in fact there is now another, the LGA put forward something we can borrow money from that's setting up something as an alternative, which is something you may look at.
There is something that's about some kind of
yes.
bond.
Yes. But I was just saying that there is an alternative, there's a possible alternative, which I don't know well.
Chairman, it's been around probably 6 or 7 years now, and it hasn't really picked up.
No, yeah, okay. Well, there is something there. Councillor Band.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, I think this sort of diagram setting out what's going on is a major revelation. I think it simplifies things for most people to a large extent. And I'm glad to see the terminology now on the diagram is now pretty closely aligned with what's in the paper. So I thank you for doing that. It's brought a rather good piece of paper when you discover the words were slightly different later on. My only real comment in the documents themselves is because the HRA borrowing is so dominating in terms of what we do corporately, and because it affects the prudential indicators to such a large extent, I just thought it'd be just worth expanding that first paragraph on page 122, which sets out the fact that Waverley have borrowed 184 million in March 2012. Just elaborate as why Waverley is in that position. And what we get in exchange for it, because people, I suspect, are no longer familiar about how the HRA used to work with, that's a large percentage of the revenue stream from rental and capital going back to the Treasury. And the fact that we, in exchange for making that payment, we actually got control over it.
Yes.
So it just might be worth elaborating on that, because it dominates everything else later on. So that would be my only comment, really. But I think congratulate you and your officers in putting together a fairly tortuous subject in a very coherent way, particularly with the diagram.
Thank you very much.
Pass on to Vicky.
Yes, Ken.
First of all, I wanted to say that I was delighted to see how much clearer version 2 of the capital strategy is than version 1, and so well done to Vicky for getting that done. And secondly, this is the right time to go on to the prudential indicators in Annex 6, pages 134 and onwards. I had one request, which there's no explanatory text for indicator 4, and a few lines would be helpful. And in particular to say whether to have a minus 3.4% is good or bad. I think most people will be slightly flummoxed by the fact that housing revenue account is 30%. What does it mean? And on the financing costs, general fund, these negative numbers, does that simply mean that our interest income is exceeding anything that we're treating as an interest cost, even though we don't actually borrow? We've got in indicator 2, minus 449 for 17-18, and much the same order of magnitude for the rest.
Yes, that does indicate the interest we're getting in is that's reflecting interest to general fund.
Interest, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's interest we get on the cash flow we generate.
Yeah.
Well, that's on, I think, both general fund and housing revenue taken together, isn't it?
No, that's just the just.
Well, no, hang on a second. What I'm getting at is that I thought you told me that the interest that we earn is treated as a corporate income.
It is.
And is that not, so? Is that being split between?
It is. So the interest allocated to HRA is netted against the interest they pay.
Okay, fair.
Which is significant. It's about £5 million.
In that case, I mean, a little bit of further text just explaining that. Those are the two that I found most, if you like, obscure.
Okay.
And so indicator 10 on page 137. I think I know what you mean, but it says the following table shows the amount of borrowing that is maturing. Do we need in each tenor range? And then my second question was, we've got the same numbers for upper limits and low limits. Are they really meant to be identical? Is there meant to be a range?
It literally, we haven't got a reason to separate them out.
So that's really what our current borrowing, 20% is in 0 to 5. Sorry, yes.
Yes.
That I think reflects the HRA lines, basically. That's what they are.
And that's
what the terms of them are, what the current terms are.
So in fact, would it be an idea just to explain that this is 100% HRA, and that's where the HRA borrowing is currently placed in terms of its maturity?
Yeah, sure.
Back to my first point.
Okay. Yes, exactly.
Right. How are you feeling, Leslie?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes. I think to residents, what it says in paragraph 18 of the officer report, which I've gone to make a note of what it is, page 107. Is that right? No, that's the prudential indicated. I've got to go back to the report itself. I apologise, it's page 107, prudential. Under paragraph 18, it says the Prudential Code requires local authorities to self-regulate the affordability, prudence and sustainability of capital expenditure and borrowing plans. So I think to most residents the idea of self-regulation is something that they'd be interested in keeping an eye on, let's say, and so it is important obviously that we are totally transparent as far as confidentiality and whatever allows, and that we are scrupulous in what we do in these within the capital programme. Now, page 114 ends with 714. The formal approval process. It says the capital programme will be put to the council for formal approval together with funding requirements, etc., etc. And we did that last Tuesday, I think, at the budget. It came before us. It says this ensures Waverley's overall capital strategy, governance procedures, and risk appetites are fully understood by all members. So, I'm not going to ask them, but do all members fully? I think we're being a little bit. We could reword that with the next edition, possibly, so that it doesn't look like we're just saying something pointless and that's rather too kind to members' level of understanding, perhaps. So I just think we ought to make sure that what we put in here, when a resident looks at it, is thinking, yeah, that's okay. I'm happy with that. And statements which don't quite ring true shouldn't be in here. That's what I'm saying. So I'm being overly critical, I know, but I do think we need to be quite strict on ourselves, that we don't use wording that makes us look fanciful, or overly optimistic or unrealistic. Page 117 I'm slightly concerned about, because it ends with referring to the transfer of assets. Yes, the last bullet point under affordable housing is we have to consider a range of options, which include the acquisition and appropriation of land and the transfer of assets from the HRA to the general fund. Again, I'd like to know a little bit more about that. I suppose a specific question would be, where does the law allow us, because I thought most of this is ring fenced, there are strict rules about transfer of property. And obviously, if that is something we're looking at doing, that is part of our strategy, then I'd like a little bit more explanation on that, so that people, any residents reading it, are quite happy that we're not in any way going to be infringing upon the ring fence, which I know Mike's also very keen on keeping quite clear. So the last page 122 refers to borrowing. Treasury management. Peter did mention earlier we don't have any debts, and I thought that I read in last Tuesday's council papers that we're borrowing £605,000 to do Sainsbury's car park. It was definitely under the borrowing for that capital expenditure. So if you could just confirm whether that is the case, or whether the words, where it said borrowing, it isn't the intention, or perhaps come back to me if you can clarify another day, if you can't answer that today. I appreciate it's an off the cuff, and I should have asked it earlier if I had time. Am I there? Okay, last thing only, which I brought up at August and last year also, is in respect of TMP4, Treasury Management Practice 4 on page 127, where we leave the door open to the use of derivatives. I am fully aware that, I do have concerns, I'm fully aware that we have no intention at the moment of getting into any dodgy derivatives, and that some derivatives could be seen as being acceptable, but I think there should be some definition of what is acceptable, because that can look very iffy and worrying to residents. But that's all. Thank you very much, Chairman. If you would take that, bear that in mind.
There's one. Down order.
Well, I just like to make a comment on page 131 about the fact that officers, we expect that the majority of non-specified investments will be with other local authorities for added security. Well, bearing in mind what's happened to Northamptonshire, I'm not sure that other local authorities are a good security. I think maybe we should perhaps not include other local authorities.
Better than other things, right?
I think we'd better leave the money under the pillow, I think.
Doesn't the comment that there are local authorities and local authorities?
Well, exactly.
There you are. Okay. Anybody else wish to comment? Okay. Okay, well, this is recommended the value of money and customer service organization consider the content of the report reflected and agrees any comments to be forwarded to the executive. I think. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Right, onwards we go. Agenda item 12, update report on the progress of capital expenditure process and management review recommendations. Jasmine.
Thank you, Chair. As the report states, a working group of this committee, chaired by Councillor Band, undertook a review of the process and management of the capital expenditure process of the Council, and this concluded in March 2018. The group made 19 recommendations with the aim of improving the process from initiation of projects through to delivery. The progress of these recommendations is contained within the report, along with some graphs showing the outturn of the capital projects of 16-17 and 17-18 by service compared to opening and approved budgets. These graphs were originally created for the working group in order to give a visual representation of slippage. When the original report was presented to this committee in March 18, it was agreed that the graphs would be recreated to include 17-18 outturn and presented to this committee. It is worth remembering that the recommendations were agreed after the 17-18 budget was set, so their full impact won't be realised until later years. The progress column of the action plan details the changes that have been made to the process as a result of the review. It's worth noting, in parallel to the scrutiny review, the Council's project management process was already being reviewed by an officer group, and as a result of the outcomes of both of these reviews, significant changes to the Council's project management documentation have been made. These include more rigorous project initiation documents with project plans linked to spend projections and tightened governance arrangements. Finance have also made some changes to how spend is monitored and how savings are reported and used, to refine those in the action plan. So as a result, this is an update requested by the committee, and the recommendation is to scrutinise the progress of the actions. I'm happy to take any questions relating to scrutiny. Peter's here, if there are any questions relating to the finances. And Louise has been looking after a lot of the project management side of things, so we'd be happy to take any questions from the committee.
And I think all members of the working group have already seen copies of that. I think that's right. Okay. Yes, Councillor Ban.
Yeah, inevitably. Well, firstly, thank you for this, and thank you, Yasmin, yet again, for producing things in sort of in graphical format, which make it much easier to understand. I've got just one question. One of the big issues has always been the fact that each year we found that some of the capital spend was rescheduled to a subsequent year, and that doesn't appear on these graphs. At least I don't understand. I don't see where it does appear if it does appear. So it needs to be, I think, to be clear when we say a certain amount has been of the approved budget has been spent. And some of them, especially on the HRA, refer to savings. Is this real? And because it would be useful to see how much of the approved budget has actually been rescheduled into subsequent years, because it would give us a clearer picture of what actually has happened in the year, and whether they are real savings or not real savings. So that's the first point. It would be useful to see that. The second point, I thought, and it really harks back to the previous agenda item, Chairman, it might be worth considering this particular ONS committee setting up a working group to have a quick look at some of the capital projects which have gone into the 2019-20 budget to see to the extent to which they have actually complied with the new capital investment strategy. But I mean, I leave that for you and others to decide. But it might be just worthwhile pick a selection of the newly items in the newly approved budget, and just to see exactly how closely the recommendations have been followed.
Good point. Councillor Moore.
Quick question, and again, perhaps Councillor Band's a good person to ask this too, if I may. We've got two metrics. One is the outturn according to the opening budget, and the outturn according to the approved budget. Now, my natural reaction when I first saw this was that if we've got approved budgets which are different from the opening budgets, why are we interested, or should we be interested, in the outturn according to the opening budget, which has been superseded?
Not at all, I think. It's just a number.
That's what I thought, but I didn't want to miss it.
And we have a terminology, rightly or wrongly, is that the budgets keep moving. It's an alien concept to me. I come from a background which says you fix a budget at the beginning of the year and everything else is a latest forecast, a variation. The way it's done here is the budget moves depending on approved changes to it, so that you reset the budget each time you agree a variation. Don't ask me why, but that's what happens. So we get into a problem with terminology occasionally. But I agree, the only thing worth really looking at is the final approved figure and where you get to in terms of performance during the year.
Educate me one more time. How often, I didn't know this, how often do budgets get approved and reapproved?
Depends when requests for additions or subtractions come through.
I see.
But usually at the quarter points, but I mean, it can happen at any time. Subject to council's approval. Each time there's a change, it comes through the executive and then on to council. And either it is council to approve depending on the quantum, or if it is within the executive's gift for noting at council. So you have the two stages.
If that's correct, which it obviously is, it actually does suddenly mean that having both metrics makes sense. You see how much messing around has been.
Well, you would see that, yeah. But reporting the outcome is neither here nor there.
Okay,
it's worth recording the number.
But it also is confused by the fact that, as Mike said, by this rescheduling of figures, whereas I'm used to actually a project having a budget across the whole number of years.
Yes.
And as long as that project is within budget for, then that's fine. You don't have to move it from one quarter to another or from 1 year to another. So that's a double level of confusion, really. Here's one, look here. Appreciate your previous years, and that's stuck up like that.
That's right.
So it's capital and operations. So capital projects and operations are really two completely separate things.
Mr. Hyman, you wish to speak on this item?
I did, Chairman, because I wanted a little bit of clarification if possible. Well, actually, I found it quite difficult, as I think others have, to get my head around. I'm not saying that I could have done it better. People could have understood it any better, but there's quite a lot of information here. And particularly, as an example, obviously we've got the Memorial Hall. I saw this as being really project management. This is a report on project management as far as I'm concerned. So with my particular experience over the years, it brings to mind the Riverside tennis courts and project management of the Riverside extension and how that went over budget and well over time. And then the Memorial Hall, which started at 0.7 of a million, 700k for a feasibility study in 2014 and ended up at 3.3 million. So, and also went a long way over time, and so obviously there are some issues which we as members do need to be quite hot on and make sure there's a lot of learning come from. I think Councillor MacLeod's got the Memorial Hall issues coming to his committee, but it is a concern to my electors, so to speak, it's in my ward. I think on page 143 we've got this, if officer can just confirm, is the major projects on page 143 at the right hand end there, which has got 2.5 million as a budget. Is that the Memorial Hall, or does it come in somewhere else? How do I find the Memorial Hall in here? And how does this explain to me that started at 700,000 and ended up at 3.3 million? I know it's over a number of years, and I don't know, I'm confused as to what this tells me and how I should read it in terms of specific things I know about. Can you help me with that? And the other thing, page 145, there's a number on there, which is at the top, approvals in year, 82, and then there's a number which I don't recognise as actually being a number.
Sorry.
Which is, no, that's just a typo altogether,
Yeah,
but that left me completely, I wasn't going to understand that page at all, however I looked at it. So what's going on there? How do we know which major projects it is? Because with the memorial, I can't see what I know as being reflected in this, and I'd like to be able to understand it in reality. Anyone help with that?
Chairman? Yeah. So I completely understand your desire to scrutinise such a massive project that's had such profile as it has. I would say though these graphs were originally created for the working group and they were a very blunt instrument to look overall at slippage within the services. They weren't designed necessarily to show you about specific projects. It is ultimately the results of the capital expenditure working group. They did reflect project management a lot, but these graphs were never designed to look at specific projects. I haven't brought it with me, but I do have a list of what I've got these figures from Excel sheets. So, okay.
So the major projects, page 143.
Yeah.
There's 840 grand opening budget. Approved budget is 238,730. So predominantly most of that is Memorial Hall, of the 2 million brought forward, because that reflects the slippage on the timing delays on the Memorial Hall. The other element in there was the Farncombe Day Centre refurbishments that happened.
Is that necessarily receipts from Crest Nichols and 800,000 then?
I don't know about the financing of 800, I've got it in front of me, Chairman.
Councillor Adams first, then Councillor Brown.
Is it our practice to, when we finish a major project like that, to actually produce a full review report, saying exactly what's we started with, what's changed on the way, and what's happened at the end?
So the last major project we've done was Memorial Hall, and I do believe that's happened.
Okay, so if there's a project review document, then Councillor Hyman can get all the information he wants from that document. So again, it's a question of actually being able to find the information more than actually trying to put bits and pieces into something which is a summary like this.
Councillor Brown?
Well, Brian has actually mentioned what I was going to say, because just for Councillor Hyman's benefit, the working group which looked at the capital projects really went in great depth into the Memorial Hall and produced some specific recommendations in relation to what had happened there. And it's particularly relating to large projects which run over for more than 1 year. And I think subsequently the whole accounting basis of long-term projects actually has been changed. It may be worth Councillor Hyman looking again at the report which the working group produced. We had 19 specific recommendations which were taken to the executive and adopted by the executive, and are now form part of the updated project management procedure. Which is why I was saying early on that it might be a good idea to take 1 or 2 of the projects in the current budget and test whether, to what extent, the updated procedure has actually been followed in detail.
Do you mind, Chairman?
Sure.
I can talk further outside this meeting.
Absolutely. I was just thinking about what Councillor Mulliner was saying about, the savings, are they realistic or whatever? Because when I look at this and then we agreed, say, £2.5 million at one point. We'd agreed at £1.5 million. We added more. So to that project we had £2.5 million. Then, if we'd added an extra £1 million on, just for the fun of it, we would have come out with a saving of £1 million at the end in the savings column. So if that helps with next year's budget, there's an easy way of doing it.
Councillor Gordon-Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't want to criticise too much because I know somebody's worked on this. It's very misleading to put these lines on these graphs. Strictly speaking, there is absolutely no relationship across a graph like that whatsoever. As a professor of statistics, I told my classes you cannot do this. There should be a pair of dots in each column.
Thank you, Chairman. You will notice those are for the 16-17. I did learn my lesson for the 17-18. So
I thought you were because I thought, well, if you move them around, you can get your graphs moving upwards always. It's wonderful. Yes.
I think I would say actually, it was requested to bring it back to this committee, and it should be an annual review, really, basically. And I think your suggestion of looking to make basis worth doing it, Councillor. So I think you ought to do that. And with the moral laws, it's an example.
I think it's, personally, I think it's an important test to do, having done the piece of work.
Yes.
Well, absolutely. Unless you actually show the officers concerned that it is being followed through on, I couldn't be too surprised if they thought, well, we'll say we're doing it, but who's going to check? Well, if we do, I'm sure many will do it out of a proper sense of duty, but we don't want anyone to think you're not going to be interested in this after all the work was put into it.
Yes, exactly. I'd love to do this on the Queen Elizabeth II, by the way, but please.
Sorry, thank you, Chairman. All I would say, in addition to that, and to try and reassure you that we are putting in that sort of management practice in terms of lessons learned and things at the end, so all the normal stuff that you get at the end of a project. In addition, our Chief Executive has also, it's one of the things that Nora's doing, and it will be brought to the ONS committees, is a programme of significant sort of corporate projects and how they're going against sort of the various criteria. So you will have a better overview on corporate projects in the future coming to ONS.
Okay. Okay, well, I think subject to the suggestion by Councillor Bannon, I agree the recommendation is that, well, we remember that, the committee to unite the progress of the recommendation, discuss action and draft by your yes. Subject to the what you've suggested, yes, agree?
Agreed.
Add to the work programme. Add to the work programme. Okay, which brings us, guess what? To the work programme, Yasmin.
thank you. So committee members might remember that the property investment company was due at one point to come along, a report on it to come along to this committee meeting. However, we were still waiting on some legal advice. So the suggestion is, and I've spoken to the chairman and vice chairman about this, to have a special value for money customer service committee meeting on the 11th of March, starting at 6 p.m. to look at that report, the property investment company report. Obviously, it's a very important item, and it will be going on, I think, to executive and council later on, or no, it doesn't need to. No, that's right, it doesn't need to because it's already been agreed. Sorry, ignore me. So just to let councillors be aware of that special that will be put in the diary. Moving on to the work programme. Proper. So there are one or two items on the work programme for next year for the new committee. Obviously, we might have some new committee members, and we're working with the Democratic Services team to deliver a comprehensive induction programme for all councillors, ones returning and new ones. And this will include scrutiny. This will involve a work programming exercise at one point or another to develop the work programme for 2019-20. This doesn't mean I'm not willing to take suggestions for the work programme, but that exercise will be done with the new committee. For today's meeting, councillors can find the progress of working groups on page 162 in section B, and the outcomes of, as ever, the outcomes of the committee's recommendations on page 163, section C. I will add to the work programme to make the progress of the capital expenditure review recommendations an annual report, and we can add that working group, Councillor Van, that you suggested in the committee agreed to section B. I think that's all from me on the committee work programme. Happy to take any questions.
Questions? Yes, Councillor.
Can I add something for the forward programme, which I've already mentioned to you before, and that is the housing revenue account procurement. policies, particularly as far as some of these contractors are concerned, concerning bathrooms and kitchens for council houses. This year I think we spent £800,000 on new bathrooms and new kitchens. Well, I spent the afternoon in Dewsons, and it's very possible to get a very nice bathroom and kitchen for £2,000. So £2,000 divided into £800,000 is 400 bathrooms and kitchens. Admittedly, I haven't taken into account the contractors' fees, but I do think we need to look at it to find out how much is spent on procurement and how much is actually given to the contractors on their fees, because I think there might be an excessive.
Is that housing?
Yeah, I mean, that's the problem. I mean, could we get to the housing group, or should we look at it?
I suppose it's a difficult one. Obviously, value for money have remit on in terms of value for money. It could always be a joint.
Could we take it to the coordinating board?
That's
the best way forward. Take it to the coordinating board, which meets on wherever it is. In March. Yes, that's right. That's right. So we'll take it to the coordinating board. Get the whole.
Okay.
So that, okay. Anybody else want to say anything? Oh, members. Oh gosh, you're working on it. Members are invited to consider the work programme and make any comments on the amendments to consider, so including suggestions. May wish to add to the curriculum. Agreed? Agreed. Right. Okay. Now we're going on to further. Now the property matter, which is at the moment, as it were, in sort of open session, I think, was really meant to be in confidential session, wasn't it?
The report is open because it's not specific.
The appendix is an exempt.
Yeah, I see, okay. Well, I've got one client I wish to speak on this, so I was going to propose moving on to exempt.
It depends how much detail the committee will
Yeah, do you have much detail you want to? Because I presume you want, I mean, you want to move into some detail, do you, Councillor?
You would need to move that we go into exempt before considering this on the next item, Chairman, but I suggest you do it before I speak, if you wouldn't mind.
Right. So what's your suggestion? I mean, I'll just take it on.
You propose the wording which we can read under item 15, I think it is.
Okay, right, okay, fine.
Your members have to agree.
Okay, right, yeah.
So the wording under item 15.
No, I'm going to do that. That pursuant to preceded Rule 20 and in accordance to Section 100A, Section 4 of the Local Government Act 1992, the press and public be excluded from the meeting during consideration of the following items on the grounds that it is likely to review the nature of the business to be transacted, or the nature of the proceedings that if members of the public were present during the items, there would be disclosure to them of exempt information as defined by Section 1 of the Act, of the description specified in the appropriate paragraph of the Drives Part 1 of Schedule Provider to the Act to be specified at the meeting.
Those paragraphs are 1, 3, 5.
And those paragraphs are 1, 3 and 5. Okay? Agreed?
Agreed.
Right.
Turn off the webcast now.
Yes, no, I'm just going to do it now.
Do officers want to do an introduction to this?
Oh, well,
We're not off.